I'd like to invite you to join me right now as the SPRC committee from the First Church of Divine Expectations gets ready for their latest meeting. The good Reverend Wesley has recently announced his retirement, long overdue, and the committee is beginning the needs assessment process to discern the pastoral needs and the requirements of their congregation. Please enter with me and join the meeting.
Are we all here? Yep. Good. Then I call this meeting of the SPRC to order. We need to choose a pastor, but we don't know how. We just know that we need one, and we need one now. Old Wesley is retiring. It's been a good run. Now we have to find the right one to get the job done. So I want you all to share what you think would serve us best. We can have a calm discussion as we now pursue this quest. Now Sally and Jane and Harold and Bob, please prayerfully consider what we need for this job.
It's time to choose a woman that has never been done. She would naturally be talented and good to everyone. Musical, hardworking, of course, a good cook, a very proper person who does things by the book.
I'd hope that a woman would think outside the box. She'd have wonderful ideas that would bring new folks in flux. She could even have a family, but she'd have to understand that the church would be priority, whatever the demand.
I don't care about the gender. It's intellect I seek. Someone willing to teach classes several times each week. The sermons should be stimulating lessons on the scripture so we can quote the Bible and really have the picture.
I want someone who's serious, but mostly lots of fun. I don't want to delve too deeply. I'm always on the run. Entertaining and amusing, yes, that's what I seek. Not anything too heavy, because I have that all week.
So what I'm hearing so far, without addressing gender, is hard to put together because it's such a mind bender. You want someone who's talented, funny, and works hard, who always does things proper, but also avant-garde. Who teaches lots of scripture, but maybe not too much. Musical, good preacher, could even serve a lunch. What about the needs of our folks outside the church? Would you want a pastor to visit and to search?
I wouldn't need a visit, but my mom is in the home. I'd want someone to visit so she doesn't feel alone.
I know that is important and takes a lot of time. Maybe on her day off, she wouldn't mind.
As long as he continues to read and write and teach, the visits are a good way to practice what to preach.
A woman would be caring for all those in need. She'd make time for everyone, and that is guaranteed.
What about the young ones, little kids and teens? Do we want a pastor who can handle all those scenes?
Of course we need the children included in our choice. Maybe we should ask them, then they would have a voice.
Why should we even bother them? Decisions aren't their thing. They cannot have the wisdom. All they care about is bling.
They'd know if someone's fun or not, that we can be clear. I think we should include them regardless of their years.
I'd hope that they would ask her what would be the rules they could expect for youth group, for church and Sunday school.
So we want someone who visits, regardless of the hour, who's here to serve at all times, never glum or sour, who understands all ages, who's open, not on guard, who's everything to everyone. That shouldn't be too hard. As we discuss our longings and our anticipations, we haven't talked of salary yet. What are the expectations?
I'd like a younger person with energy to spare, as long as their ideas weren't too wild or laissez-faire.
We
need someone who's learned in theology and life, but not too old and rigid. That would lead us to more strife.
That means they'd want more money, which we can't afford. Perhaps they would be satisfied just serving for the Lord.
Well, they'll get a free house, and that's not even all. It comes already furnished with pictures on the wall.
I hope they like the flamingos on the wall. The art's original, and Gertrude really liked it, especially they're tall.
If they can fix a furnace, that would be a plus. And keeping the parsonage clean and neat. No pets, that's a must.
I'm hoping that the corn and beans will be a handsome price so folks can give more to the church. Now that would be so nice.
We'll need to give our list to the district superintendent. We're not too realistic, so we might have to amend it. Merely walking on the water or flying with no net will not be quite enough for us until our needs are met. Let's all prayerfully consider what we're really in need of. A person with a loving heart who will help us share God's love.
Amen.
It's for me, just a minute. Oh, hello, this is Pastor Diane. Oh, Heechon. The cabinet wants me to move? We didn't plan on that this year. You say it's a perfect match? A great fit for my gifts and graces. The cabinet really wants me to consider this. Why me? Someone who's musical? A good cook? Someone who's innovative and traditional, serious and fun, teaches lots of scripture but not too much. Are you sure you have the right person? They want me to visit on my days off. Great parsonage, though, you say. Plenty of room for the kids. You do know we have a golden retriever. Maggie's a good old dog. Bladder's not as good as it used to be. Well, you say she'll blend right in with the pink flamingos. All right, well, I'll take time to pray about it. When do you need to know? Oh, the cabinet's meeting tomorrow, you say. You'll need my answer in the morning. Well, I guess I better get going on those prayers, then talk to you tomorrow. Wow. Whew. Well, good evening. My name is Diane McClanahan. I am an ordained elder here in the Iowa Annual Conference, and as Margaret mentioned, I am an appointed person in Extension Ministry to the Des Moines Pastoral Counseling Center. In my role at the center, I get to work with clergy and with congregations from 8 mainline Protestant denominations throughout the state of Iowa. I serve as a spiritual director, a clergy coach, a church consultant, and conflict mediator. So as you might imagine, I see a lot of stress and anxiety that clergy and congregations are dealing with these days. During the past year, my colleagues and I have been doing ethical boundary trainings throughout the state of Iowa. We've taught all the clergy throughout the state, and many laity as well have come to those trainings. And at each training, we have asked the clergy to share with us the tasks that they feel their congregations are expecting them to be good at, something that they have to do well within their churches. And here's what they said: preaching, teaching, church administration, confirmation, weddings, funerals, baptisms, supervision of all staff members, visiting the sick and homebound, conflict resolution, Visioning, strategic planning, finances, stewardship planning, troubleshooting, a myriad of building concerns, including toilet plunging, pastoral care and counseling, preparation of charge conference reports, community engagement, showing up at soccer games, working with youth, children's sermons, reaching out to visitors, membership classes, helping with vacation Bible school, worship planning, missions, advocacy, and attending committee meetings. What a mess, right? No one can be good at all of those things. It's impossible. Trying to do all of that and keep everyone happy, it's a task every pastor, any pastor, is destined to fail. And you know what? Most of the pastors I know keep trying to juggle all those things every single day of their ministry. So no wonder a lot of pastors come to my office exhausted and spiritually depleted. They come into ministry called by God to serve with such high hopes, and we'll get to witness some of that at this very annual conference. We'll be celebrating and supporting and affirming the ministry of lay ministers, which we've already done here this evening, and I'm totally and utterly impressed. We'll be celebrating licensed local pastors and ordained deacons and elders, all who are very humbled and awed by the opportunity that they have to be difference makers for our churches, our conference, our communities, and our world. And that's exciting stuff to witness, and we'll all get to do that this weekend. And then we'll go home to our own churches. And I'm wondering, before we even get started, how can we celebrate, support, and affirm the ministry of our pastors once we all get back home? How can we all be positive difference makers in the lives of the clergy who serve throughout the conference? So that's what I've been invited to ask you to consider this evening. When I think about how laity can be difference makers in the lives of their pastors, the first thing that comes to mind for me is that we all can keep doing what we already do really well. Between us all, I bet we could come up with a large list of the ways that we are already supporting the ministry of our clergy throughout the conference. And so to get our minds stimulated on that, I'd just like for you to turn, and this is really a risk. We have short time to do this. It's a risk for me to ask you to do this because I'm going to ask you to come back, pay attention back to me again, but I'd love to have you just turn to one another for just a minute and share, just think to yourselves, what are some of the things that we already do within our congregations to help us support the ministry of our pastors? I'm going to give you 1 minute. Turn to somebody and share something that you already do. I am. Whoops. We got some laughter. Yeah, that's good. Yeah. I'm going to go up here. Yeah. 5 seconds. Okay, time's up. All right. I bet you could have kept talking about that. How did you do? Did you think of some things? I wish that we could actually have some feedback in this large group setting so we could begin to hear from each other what you're already really doing well in your congregations to help make a difference in your pastors' lives. But I think we're too big a crowd for that, and we would not have enough time. So what I'm going to do is just simply name some things and ask you by show of hands if you've already been thinking about some of these. So one of them would be making a difference in the times of transition. How many of you thought about how you welcome new pastors and say goodbye to pastors who are leaving? Did anybody talk about that? We've got some hands out there. Very good. All right, we have, can you raise your hand if you are a part of a church that's going to experience a transition this year? Look at that. We've got a lot of churches who are going to experience transition this year. So you're in our thoughts and prayers this season. So are the pastors who are both leaving and coming into your midst. So one of the things that's incredibly important for pastors and for all of you is the way you do that transition. How do you say goodbye to a pastor who's leaving? You just let him go? Or are there ways that you can celebrate their ministry regardless of the reason why they may be going? There are liturgical ways that you can do that, and there are also the ways that we as United Methodists love. We love to throw a party and we love to eat food. So, and that's something really important, not just as you are celebrating the service, the ministry, the love of a pastor who is leaving, but also for those who are coming in. And what I would say to you is that unless you can say a good goodbye, it is really difficult to say hello. There's still grief and attachment that you may have for pastors who are leaving you, and until you can really let them go, it is hard to say hello to a new pastor. And it's also hard for the pastors if they have not had a way to really mark their ministry in one place to be able to move to another. So when pastors leave, it's really important that you let them go. And it's not appropriate to ask them to come back for weddings and funerals, no matter how much you love them. It really puts them in a bad, uncomfortable place when that happens, and it's hard for them to say no, but that's exactly what they need to do. So saying a good goodbye and saying a warm welcoming hello, those are ways that we can really bless our pastors and make a difference in their lives. So I want to share with you what one church did for me when I was coming into ministry at their congregation. There was a dear couple in that church who decided that the Sunday before I would preach my first sermon at their church. I had already moved into the neighborhood. They decided that they would have me over to dinner with my husband and a few people from the congregation so we could get to know a few friendly faces before that first Sunday came. And we had a wonderful time. It was a great dinner, and as we were getting ready to leave, everybody's saying their goodbyes. The couple who hosted the dinner party said to me, we're so very sorry that we can't make it to your first sermon. We have this family reunion and we're so torn, but we're so sorry that we can't be there to evaluate your first sermon. True story. And so I don't know if it was the expression on my face or if they just realized their choice of words were not exactly what they really meant to say, but they quickly rephrased their good wishes for my first Sunday, and we headed out the door. So evaluate. It's what we do, isn't it? And I have to say, as a clergy person, I no longer serve a congregation. I get to sit in the pew, and I can tell you clergy are equally guilty of this. We do tend to sit back and evaluate what goes on in front of us in worship. And as a clergy person, we can all benefit from critique. We can all benefit from learning ways that we can improve the work that we do. But think about what it feels like to be critiqued, evaluated by an entire congregation every single Sunday morning. I have to say, from my own experience, as one who is guilty of doing some of that myself, I know when I am being most critical of the pastors who are in front of me preaching, I am far less likely to hear the still small voice of God. I'm far less likely to be fed by what is happening. So what if we opened our hearts and our minds to new pastors as they come in? What if we were to look for their gifts and their graces rather than their faults? Because pastors are human beings and full of talents and flaws, and I've learned that whatever we look for, we will find. So I want to ask for another show of hands, too. How many of you talked, when we asked you to share a little bit, how many of you talked about the parsonage? Anybody do that? Anybody share about the parsonage? Ooh, yes, good, thank you. We had somebody who did, couple people who talked about the parsonage. Caring for the parsonage is one way that you can care for your pastor, but we all know how tricky that is within our United Methodist system, right? Especially in a system where the moving van pulling out with one pastor's and family's possessions is followed only days or sometimes even hours by the next moving van pulling in with all the possessions of your next pastor. I'm half of a clergy couple. I came into ministry later in life, but from the tender age of 22, when I married my husband, Art, I lived in one parsonage after another for the churches that he served, and we did that for 30 years. At one church, early on in his ministry, I went with him to the introductory meeting with the Staff Parish Relations Committee. It wasn't quite like that Staff Parish Relations Committee. But the pastor who we were going to be following was very gracious and invited us into his home so we could see what the parsonage looked like while we were there for that SPRC meeting. And the SPRC chair assured us that while the house really did need some work, the congregation was very committed to preparing it well for us before we got there. So it happened, we were able to actually move into the parsonage the week after my husband's first sermon instead of the week before it. So here we were at church, he did the worship service, preached, and the SPRC chair came running up to us after the service, and he particularly came to me and he said to me, "Diane, you will never recognize your kitchen." Oh? He said, "Yeah, let me take you over and we'll show you what we're doing." So we went in there, and we were supposed to move in 2 days later. Moving van coming, getting us all packed up. And I walked in there, and there was no kitchen. No cabinets, no counters, no floors, no appliances, unless you count the appliances that were sitting in the dining room, because they had been moved out of there. So they had really gotten energetic, and they were doing a major renovation, and we were supposed to move in a couple days later, and we were told, "No worries, don't worry about this. We've got it all set for you. There's a couple in the church who are going on a 2-week vacation, and their house is available. So you could move into their house for 2 weeks. And you know what? So you're house sitting, isn't that great? It'll help them, it'll help you. And all you got to do is take care of their Great Dane while you're there." I'm not making this up. You couldn't do that, right? This is true stuff. So after 2 weeks, when the kitchen wasn't ready even then, we ended up, I don't know if you've done major renovations, but it takes time. And so we ended up moving in with the SPRC chair and his wife for 6 more weeks. Whoa, right? We each had a suitcase. And then all our other worldly possessions were heaped up in a pile in one of the rooms in the parsonage as we waited to move in. We had wonderful hospitality. We loved the couple that we stayed with. We got to know them really well, and it was probably, it's a wonderful thing. But I wouldn't recommend that you try this at home, folks. So taking care of the parsonage is important, and it's necessary. It makes a difference in the lives of our pastors. Talk to your pastor first about the needs of their families, and make the parsonage a place you'd want to live in. But even more important, a house that will truly feel like home for your pastor and his or her family. All right, I'm going to ask you for a show of hands one more time. How many of you talked about time off? Time off. Yay, you did it. Good. So I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions just for your reflection here. Does your pastor take a regular day off? Do they? I mean, really off. Does your congregation encourage that time off, honor that time, not just by prefacing calls and emails with, "Pastor, I know it's your day off, but," and then carry on, right? So have members of your congregation been taught to refrain from calling and texting and emailing on your pastor's day off? Have you encouraged your pastor not to respond to routine texts, calls, and emails on their day off, so it can really and truly be a Sabbath for them? And then, is there someone else who can be on call for the emergencies that occur inevitably on your pastor's day off, because that's when they always happen? So, and how about vacations? Are your pastors good about taking all the time that they should to replenish themselves, to rest, and to be ready then to come back and provide the care? That whole mess of stuff that they do regularly, do they take that time? Pastors are encouraged by their district superintendents, by our bishop, to take renewal leave. How many of you have had a pastor who's had a renewal leave within the last few years? Have you had a pastor who's done that? Wonderful. All right, if you don't know what I'm talking about, come see me. We'll talk. We'll talk about what renewal leave is and how important it is for the lives of your pastors. And I would encourage you to think about this. Pastors often are afraid to go to their SPRCs to talk about even taking a renewal leave because they're afraid of the reaction they may get. So I would encourage you to approach them about whether or not they're ready for a renewal leave, and work with them, not only so that they can have a time of renewal, but so that the congregation itself can learn during that time that the pastor's away how to care for one another and how to really look forward to receiving back a pastor who's refreshed and renewed. So the other question I would have is, are you encouraging your pastors to grow professionally? How many of you talked about continuing ed? Did anybody talk about that? Yeah, we got one over here. Thank you. So that's such an important part of a pastor's life, that we don't get stale, that we continue to learn new ways of being in ministry, that we continue to grow. And I want to make sure that invite you to be sure that there is enough continuing ed funds available for your pastor to do that on a regular basis. But even more important, how are you when your pastor comes back, all excited about an event that they went to and the ideas that they have to bring back to the church? Are you ready to hear it? Are you ready to welcome those new ideas, new opportunities? Sometimes our pastors need special accommodations for the major events that are going on in their lives. Bishop Laurie wrote a book called Recess, Rediscovering Play and Purpose. And in that book, she tells the story of a time after the birth of her third child. She was working half-time as an associate pastor, and the women of the church purchased a portable playpen that she set up in her office so that she could actually put her daughter to bed in the playpen and then attend meetings, so that she was able to know that her daughter was right there with her and still be the pastor of the church. And it was especially useful for those evening meetings so she could put her daughter to bed. So here's what she writes in her book. "How it hurt then," she writes, "when I heard through the grapevine that I was being criticized for bringing my baby to work. Needless to say, I didn't bring Talitha to work very much after that. It only takes one or two people to take away all the joy of ministry." So I've only begun to scratch the surface. Rituals for times of transition, care for pastors, home, encouraging time away, supporting opportunities for spiritual growth and continuing education, making accommodations in the work environment for special seasons in a pastor's life. These are all ways that we can make a difference, a positive difference for the pastors of the Iowa Annual Conference. In a moment, I'm going to ask you to respond, to make a commitment, actually, to reflect and decide how you personally might go back to your churches and make a difference, a positive difference in the lives of the pastors that are serving you. But before that, I want to lift up one more thing. Some of our churches are experiencing growth in membership, but many are experiencing just the opposite. Research is showing that mainline denominations are in decline. Those of us who have been around long enough to remember the 50s and 60s may want to go back to the good old days when sanctuaries and Sunday schools were filled. But we're not there anymore, and we're all feeling anxious about that. I know I am. People have left church, and we miss them. And younger people don't seem to be coming back to church as they used to in young adulthood. Our congregations are aging, and we wonder what will happen when we're all gone. If you're feeling sad and wonder what will happen in your church, you're not alone. It's not just happening in your church. It's much bigger than that. But here's the thing, anxiety in churches often gets played out in unhealthy ways. It actually creates some of the things we're so afraid of and keeps us from focusing our attention on what God is actually calling us to be and do, even during times of uncertainty and change. Some congregations blame their pastors or the conference for what's happening to them. We'd be fine if we only had the perfect pastor, the right pastor, the pastor who is just like, and then fill in the blank with your favorite pastor. But the conference keeps giving us the wrong person. We were so hopeful the last pastor was going to be the one to save us, but we were sadly mistaken. We need a new one. We end up with a revolving door, some churches, with the endless search of finding just the right pastor, and the conference and superintendents are blamed each time for not getting it right. What would happen if we considered the possibility that the right pastor is the one we have? What would happen if instead of evaluating our pastors from the moment they walk in our doors, we commit to helping our pastors to succeed? What would happen if instead of blaming one another for the fact that the church across all mainline denominations right now is no longer what it was in the 50s or 60s? What would happen if pastors and laity walked arm in arm out of this annual conference session on Monday, committed to listening to where the Spirit of God is leading here and now? What difference could that make? We're going to give you a couple of moments now for reflection, and I'd like to really see if we could create some sacred space around that. If you could just remain silent during just a moment. And in that moment, I'd invite you to think about what kind of commitment you might make to the pastors that are serving in your midst. How might you be positive difference makers for the pastors who serve you? You have a little orange card that was attached to the papers that you were handed or that you received when you first came. Anybody want to, can you hold them up so we can all see that you have them, right? There's a little orange card. And what we're going to ask you to do after this moment of silence is to just write down one thing that you can commit to doing throughout the course of this next year to be a positive difference maker in your pastor's life. And when you leave at the end of this session, you can just leave them on your table or chairs, and they'll be collected, and what will be done with them will be posted on a wall where the pastors, when they come in tomorrow morning, can see them. You don't have to put your name on it, but just think about how that will feel and what kind of morale booster that might be for pastors when they see that. So I'm going to give you a few moments, just quiet moments, to go ahead and write. Blessings to each of you and to all the churches that you serve, that you represent. You serve them too at this annual conference session. May we all respond to God's call to make a difference wherever we are. Amen.